This program contains candid discussion of gender identity and may include adult topics and language. Listener discretion is advised. This episode of Trans Chat with Christiana is being brought to you by True Voice Lessons, LLC. Offering the finest in online and in-person voice and music instruction, True Voice Lessons has what you're looking for. Transgender voice training, singing, piano, guitar, and much, much more. Let our highly qualified staff of instructors help you achieve your goals. TrueVoiceLessons.com. Unlock your true voice today.
Trans Chat with Christiana. Real people, real lives, real talk. Trans Chat with Christiana.
Hi, and welcome to Trans Chat. Real people, real lives, real talk. I'm your host, Christiana Brekke. I'm so excited about today's guest, Jake Galbraith. Jake is a former schoolmate from my days in rural Nevada, way back before either of us transitioned. We're going to talk about his trans journey, his work, and shoot the breeze a little about the old days. Totally looking forward to that. Now that the Democrats have officially nominated their presidential candidate, it's time for the games to begin. I never intended for this podcast to get political. I don't even like politics. I'd rather be sleeping well at night and not worrying about this shit. Be like my dad, who stopped watching the news like 2 months ago. But I'm trans. I don't have that option. Dad can stop watching the news because he knows that he'll be fine, no matter who gets elected president. Nobody's trying to deny his health care, or keep him out of public restrooms, or in any way strip him of his civil rights or his dignity. It's times like this when I kind of miss that old white pretending to be cisgender male privilege. Back when I, too, could ignore politics. Back when my political leanings were based on my feelings and my opinions, and not on the fight for my basic rights. I didn't ask for this fight. I do not, in any way, enjoy being a pawn in a corrupt political system, or the object of so much controversy, division, and hatred. I'm tired of trying to explain myself to people who refuse to hear me and will never accept me. I didn't ask for this fight. But here I am, exhausted, beaten down, and clinging desperately to a tiny thread of hope. In 2016, I had plenty to say, and I wasn't afraid to say it. I was an outspoken proponent of Hillary Clinton. I stood up and defended the trans community as best I could. But what good did it do? Trump was still elected, and the transgender onslaught began, just as predicted. One of the most basic questions voters ask themselves when choosing a presidential candidate is, am I better off now than I was 4 years ago? For me, the answer to that is simple. Hell no, I am not better off now than I was 4 years ago, not even close. I haven't had a good night's sleep since August 2016. If it weren't for the higher courts coming to our defense, trans people in America would be in a world of hurt right now. I'm talking on the verge of extinction. We would have no federal protections against discrimination in any form. Employment, housing, healthcare, you name it. The message being conveyed to the trans community by our current president couldn't be clearer. Get back in the closet or get out. I don't believe that Trump, personally, even gives a damn about trans people one way or the other. He's just using us and exploiting us to appease his base because we're an easy target. And he knows that so many Americans still fear and loathe trans people, especially trans women. So, I ask my fellow trans Americans, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? Has your access to trans health care become better in the past 4 years? Have your employment opportunities increased? Do you feel safer using public restrooms? Are trans youth better off now without the federal guidelines set forth during the Obama administration? Do you feel like your state has your back? Your country? Your community? If you can answer yes to any of these, that's great. I'm so happy for you. As a West Coast girl, I know how good it feels to live in a state that at least acknowledges us and affords us the same rights and protections as everyone else. When I was living in the Pacific Northwest, I didn't worry quite so much about Trump's attacks on trans people because I knew that my state would still protect my basic civil rights. But I've also lived in states that don't. Places where neither the justice system nor public sentiment are on our side. Places where trans folks continue to be demonized and politicized. For them, having the most basic civil rights protections at the federal level is crucial. Because without it, a trans person in Mississippi is no better off than a trans person in South America, the Middle East, or Russia. Even if I thought Trump had any redeeming qualities as a U.S. president, which I do not, how could I, in good conscience, support someone with such an obvious agenda against trans people? I'm not Caitlyn Jenner. So that brings us to Joe Biden. Is he the perfect candidate? No, but who is? Sure, he's been in politics since Jurassic times, but he was also VP for 8 years during the most progressive and trans-friendly presidential administration this country has ever known. That's worth quite a bit in my book. I've seen it described this way. I read it somewhere, so I can't take credit for it. Choosing a president isn't like choosing a spouse. We're not looking for our one and only soulmate. Instead, picking a president is like taking the bus. And while neither bus may be going exactly where we want to go, we get on the one that's going closest to where we want to go. It's unfortunate that there are only 2 real buses to choose from, but that's the reality of American politics. Sure, you can hop on a 3rd or 4th independent bus, but they never go anywhere. As you're deciding what bus to get on this November, consider where we've been going for the past few years. Imagine where we would be right now if it weren't for the higher courts. Think of our fellow trans folks living in states with no legal protection of their rights, no access to trans health care, and trans people of color who are enduring a double dose of social contempt right now. I won't go so far as to tell you who you should vote for. Who you support as president is your choice, your right, and your business. For me, it isn't a choice at all. I wouldn't get on the Trump train for anything. Real people, real lives, real talk.
Trans Chat with Christiana.
Today's special guest is Jake Galbraith. Jake and I attended the same remote high school in the middle of rural Nevada back in our pre-transition days in the late 80s and early 90s. Jake, thanks so much for coming. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to talking.
Well, let's get to it. Tell us about your transition. When did you realize that you were trans and you weren't who everybody thought you were?
Sure.
Give us your transition story in a nutshell.
Okay. Well, I kind of always knew, I guess, before I knew there was a word for it. I knew that I was a boy. When, from my earliest memories, and my parents and my older sibling have, before I can remember me saying, instead of when I grow up, I would say when I'm a man, and things like that. And I was never really interested in what typically were girl things. I didn't want to wear dresses or I was comfortable in boys' clothes. If you put me in a dress for school, I would cry. I just when I was 5, I just followed my dad around and wanted to do the things my dad was doing, and he built some bunk beds for my sister and I helped with that, which at 5 isn't doing a whole lot, but
but still,
and my parents were real good about not forcing me to change that at all. They were super supportive. They bought me, because of, what Dad did with the woodworking. I wanted a tool set when I was 5 for Christmas, and they got me the woodworking tool set, and they were okay with me being me. So that was really great. And
there's definitely more wiggle room for little girls. Not that you were a little girl, but society is much more lenient with girls than boys when it comes to blurring the gender lines. For boys, it's a much narrower path.
That's definitely something I noticed, and I feel some guilt for, and I kind of struggle with the guilt for that, because in a lot of ways the whole process, I think, is easier. And I don't want to say that for everyone, but for me in particular, I can see how it, in high school, I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, but being seen as a lesbian basically was different than the gay boy in school. Right. There's that double standard and
for sure
across the board. So, and
So then, was it big news then when you came out, or were they just all kind of like, oh yeah,
everybody was like, yeah, okay, we knew. So it was all through school. I mean, I was honest with people. And I guess it was easier for me to, not having a word for trans, to just say I just felt like I should have been born a boy, and that's how I was always very, I think, forthright about that with people. I was more nervous about being attracted to women being born in a female body. That was more of a potential issue, it seemed like. So
okay, so like, when did you find out then that you were trans? When did you get the terminology?
That was probably in my late teens, early 20s, and so. Again, being kind of honest with people, like the women that I dated and things, that they weren't. Most of them were lesbians and not really interested in being in a relationship with somebody who wanted to transition to being a male. So those. Going in that those probably aren't going to last very long, but they, still good people, just weren't long term. And then, so it was early 20s, I'd say, and then it was St. Patrick's Day. What I consider was my beginning of my transition was St. Patrick's Day in 2011. That's when, so I'd been with my wife for, not yet my wife, but we'd been together 6 years about, and she's totally accepting. The first person who really was okay with that, like just, didn't care, loved me for me, and that's when I started. I'd started the whole process, the whole seeing a counselor and everything before that. But I got my first shot on St. Patrick's Day, so that's what I consider my transition day.
Nice. When you started transitioning, were you working or in school? I mean, I basically disappeared for a few years, then reemerged as my true self. I wasn't in a situation where I had to transition amongst coworkers. Did you transition in a workplace? What was your situation?
I was nervous. I was at work. So, and I work, I don't mind saying who I work for. It's, I worked for US Bank and I still work for US Bank. I was in a different capacity at that time. So, in a security environment, and it's a very tight knit, small group of people where you're working it's a 24/7, and you're all working very close together. So I was nervous about it, but my manager at the time, I've known him since I was about 19. We worked together previously. And when I came out to him, or I thought I was coming out to him, he was like, "You told me that years ago." So I guess, I was nervous about it, but I guess I didn't need to be, and I was a little concerned because I was like, will this hurt my chances, you think, of being promoted or moving further in the company? And he was like,
yeah,
only if your work changes, so, people had problems with pronouns, a couple people making that switch. But mostly, everybody was great about it. So.
Well, what about your closest relatives, like your parents? Were they on board with you transitioning to male? Or were they like, can't you just be happy being a sort of butch lesbian?
Right. It was funny. I didn't directly contact my parents about it. I had created a new Facebook page with my new name, and my mom sent me a friend request because I had been a friend with my sister, and she noticed, and then she called me and she's like, "So what's going on? Do you have something you want to tell me?" I'm like, "Oh, sure." And I told her, and she was fine. She's like, we know. And that's when she'd always said the story about I'd say when I'm a man instead of when I grow up and stuff. And, she's like, it makes sense. I was more concerned about my dad, and I don't think I spoke with him that day. I said I told my mom that I was nervous about Dad hating me or something like that, and he called me, and like a couple hours later, was like, I heard you think I might hate you, and I said, well, maybe. And he's like, no, I love you, no matter what. So, I mean, they were both really great about it. So
awesome. So it sounds like you didn't have to, present any science or anything. No. Because I kind of did. My mom passed away in 2008, and I think she would have been my biggest ally. But my dad has been a lot slower to come around. Tolerant would be the best word to describe him. I didn't feel like he would really believe me, so I gave him a book that talked about the science and had essays and stories and stuff. I don't know if he's read it or not, but they say that individuals don't transition, but families do.
Yeah.
Or some don't. But yeah, I felt like I had to come at him with evidence. Yeah. Like, look, it's not just me wanting to do this. It's a real thing.
And I think the like that speaks to what you were talking about earlier, that double standard, I guess, from, going from female to male versus going the other way. I think it's just an easier road. At least it was for me. So
right.
Now my dad, he would sometimes he never slipped. He never messed up the pronouns. He would sometimes call me by his brother's names, which I thought was cute, because at least he's defaulting to a male name, right? Like if he can't remember Jake.
Right.
My mom still will say she and kind of, but I don't know. She's trying, so.
Yeah, for sure. As trans folks, we have to learn to differentiate that sort of thing. Was it intentional or just,
right.
As supportive as my mom would have been, I think she would have had a hard time with pronouns too. Mm-hmm. She really loved her son, and I was her only child. I think it would have been tough on her. Since we've been kind of talking about double standards, I wanted to talk a little about male privilege. I didn't even think it was a real thing until I got that big letter F on my ID. After transitioning to male, have you noticed any, increase in stature or level of respect?
I don't, but it's funny that you mentioned that because it reminds me of my counselor who I think she had seen quite a few trans people. I specifically looked for a trans counselor, and I think we tend to drop off the radar after we jump through the hoops with a lot of our counselors, and she wondered aloud at like my last therapy session. She's like, "So I wonder if in a few years you'll just be, another entitled middle-aged white guy." And I was like, "Wow, I hope not." I mean, I think my history speaks. I've got that history, so I understand kind of from a different perspective. But I get what you're saying, that I could definitely have it easy, or feel like I have it easy. But I think it's interesting. It's almost like a feeling like a vanishing, because I had so many things that, like being part. I mean, I know I'm still part of the LGBTQ community, but it's like once you transition and you're passing, it's like you just vanish,
right.
And then that community can disappear, and if you're not vigilant about being engaged.
And what about social situations? Have you noticed any difference in the way that just ordinary people treat or respond to you?
So one thing I've noticed since transitioning to male is that just in general public social situations is that women, children, and minorities, they give me more personal space, and they make less eye contact with me now. So I make a conscious effort to smile more and be engaging and friendly, so that I hopefully don't come across as being hostile.
You mentioned working at U.S. Bank. How long have you been working there, and how would you rate them as an employer in terms of trans friendliness?
So I've actually been with the bank for 11 years now, and I've been promoted 4 times since I transitioned.
Nice.
They're just a really inclusive place, and I feel like my contribution has been valued. I'm even giving 2 paid volunteer days every year, so I was able to do that advocacy while I'm being paid for it. So it's just a really great place for me to be personally.
I want to talk a little bit about your visit to a junior high school recently. You said that you'd spoken to a group of students and shared your story with them. I was like, wow. As open as I've been about my trans journey, to me, it would have been absolutely horrifying to do what you did. Walk us through that. I mean, I would have found that terrifying.
Terrifying is an apt description for it. I have social anxiety disorder, so it's very, and I've struggled with shyness since, as long as I can remember. So I definitely had thoughts of turning the car back around on my way and not going, but what motivated me to do that was not knowing who it was, but so it actually was set up by a teacher at the school who knows my wife and knew that I was trans, and they actually have a student who's also female to male, and they wanted somebody to be able to just speak to the entire school. So it was a great setup. I mean, we all sat around in a really giant circle, and it was both classes, so 7th and 8th grade, and they all. I spoke a little bit, but it was mostly just a back and forth, like people asking questions about my job and the transition, and how that goes and has gone for me. And it was we took a break in the middle, and when we sat down, I'm so oblivious because I'm so nervous that I didn't notice people had switched places and someone different was sitting next to me. And the teacher at the end, just told me I did a really nice job and asked me if he had introduced himself, because I guess he had moved to sit next to me after we had all gotten up, for a break. So that meant something to me. It was really, felt good to be able to do that, but it was definitely daunting.
Wow. Yeah. So, was there any like negativity? Did you sort of feel at any point like there was anybody who was giving you like a resistance, or you know what I mean?
Yeah. You'll see. It's hard to tell what's just middle school and what's genuine,
Right.
resistance. But there were some kids that seemed, with the arms crossed and the, kind of looking at you sort of suspect. And
Yeah.
but I feel like it was a good experience. I mean, everybody seemed respectful, and it was nice.
Wow. Well, kudos, Jake. I mean,
Thanks.
that just couldn't have been easy. To be honest, I don't know if I would have even agreed to it. I mean, I'd hope that I would, but I don't know. That would be really scary for me. So, you and I both went to high school in Tonopah, Nevada. Go Muckers! It was a very small town, but the only town within 100 miles big enough to have a high school. And you didn't even live in Tonopah, did you? Tell me, how much time did you spend on the school bus?
Oh, a lot of time. So I actually lived in Silver Peak, and that was 50 miles from. You were from the big city of Tonopah. See, I was from Silver Peak with 500 people instead of 2,500 people. So big difference, right? Yeah.
So what time did you have to go get on the school bus?
It was really early. I think it was before 6. I know it was an hour each way, and then doing sports, it was you got home at like 7 or 8, and just. It was. I think that's why a lot of kids didn't finish. I mean, honestly, it's a tough way to.
Yeah. For the record, I can only claim to be from the big town of Tonopah because I lived only 7 miles out of town, not 50.
Okay.
Yeah,
there
I was
you go.
out at the airport. And I had just moved from Southern California from a big school.
Okay.
And now I was in this tiny school with like 75 students in the graduating class or something like that.
Mm-hmm. And how old were you when you started?
I came in the first half of my sophomore year sometime.
Okay.
I was probably 16.
See, that would be way more culture shock than what it was for me, because we moved from a small town in Idaho when I was 6 to Silver Peak. So, I mean, it was really, I was 6.
Right.
I'd been kindergarten and first grade in small town. So it wasn't,
Right.
It was like, okay, more small town. It would be much different for you, I imagine.
Yeah, but it was only mild culture shock. My folks moved around a lot when I was a kid.
Okay.
We never spent more than 2 or 3 years at any one place, so it wasn't that big a deal, although I probably complained incessantly for a few weeks. But I thought it was weird the way this tiny school was so sort of factioned.
Right?
Yeah, and it was because of the geography. Mm-hmm. I'd never been to a school where the students lived so far from campus.
Right.
And it was weird because you had like...
the Round Mountain kids and the Goldfield kids and the Silver Peak kids and the Tonopah kids who were from different sections.
It wasn't like jocks and geeks and stoners.
Right.
It was geographical. It was weird.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I really liked about living in such a remote area was how easy it was to find solitude and privacy. I was driving by then, and sometimes alone in my car out in the desert was the only place I could sort of feel like and be myself. Mm-hmm. Did you also seek out that sort of solitude in the vastness of all that desert?
I felt I felt like I could be myself for the most part. Again, it's that double standard. I think that I was kind of an apologetic lesbian who said, I'm attracted to girls, but I feel like I should have been born a boy. So you can excuse that, right? Like,
yeah,
that made sense to me in some way, and it apparently did to other people too. Because I did okay in school. I felt like I fit in pretty well. I was student body vice president my junior year. It was okay. My struggles were actually with the principal, and I'm not sure that we had the same principal.
Oh, they had several.
Yeah.
I think there was a different principal each of the 3 years I was there.
Right. There was one boy in my class who I don't know if I was just having a bad day or what, but we didn't even really know each other or talk to each other or anything, and he came up and snickered and called me Jim. He would call me Jim, and that day it just, made me cry. It just, I just didn't, because that felt worse than, calling me anything else, because he was really making fun of me, right? So
right.
The principal walked by and saw me crying, and acted like he cared for a second. I thought he cared and was, are you okay? What's wrong? And I told him, and his response was, well, gee, I don't know why you think he would do that. And I was like, yeah.
Sakes.
And he also, the school district actually increased the number of credits that we needed to graduate our senior year, which was kind of baloney.
Wow.
I thought, yeah. And the principal, I found out after the end of the year, had let several of the girls in the class that he liked who were short on credits up to half to full credits, copy a page out of the dictionary to get those credits. And I was a quarter credit short, and he didn't give me that, so he wouldn't let me walk in the graduation. So I had to go back to school in Beatty for a quarter of a credit to graduate the next year. I mean, he was terrible. He was just a hideous excuse for a human. But I'm thinking,
who was this guy?
Right.
What year did you graduate?
Well, I should have graduated in 92. So yeah, it was, but by 92 and a quarter. That's what I'm calling it.
Was that at the new high school?
Yeah, that was the first year at the new school.
Okay, yeah. I think I was the last year at the old school, maybe second to the last. I'm not sure. I don't know if I ever even went into the new high school or not.
We just had our senior year there. That was it. And then, yeah.
Jake, thank you so much for being on my podcast.
Yeah.
I had so much fun chatting with you. I really appreciate it.
It was great to be here. Thank you for having me.
What a fun conversation with Jake. I love that he finds the time and conquers his fears to advocate for the community. As trans people, I think we're all advocates in our own way. We kind of have to be, don't we? I am extremely fortunate to still have many friends from my high school days. Friends were the only thing that made school tolerable, except my music classes. I spent so much time in the band room my junior and senior years, the freshmen thought I was Crawford's assistant. But it was still just a few hours a day, 5 days a week. The rest of the time, it was hanging out with my friends. I probably don't really deserve them. I was kind of an asshole back then, unless you were one of my closer peeps. Being a good musician made me arrogant. Being a closeted trans girl made me reclusive inside. While I had many friends, only a tiny handful ever broke through my exterior, saw through my performance, and knew the real me. Not the girl that was in me, I don't think. I put on a convincing show. But the other aspects of my character that were real. It wasn't a bad time to be a closeted trans girl. It was the late 1980s, and I was into the LA hard rock, glam, and heavy metal music of the time. I had long hair and wore colorful, blousy clothes. Sometimes I wore makeup and teased my hair big. Being a musician, I think, gave me greater license to express myself and be a little flamboyant. I took full advantage. And it was easy to drive out in the desert to cross-dress when I needed to express my femininity in a way that felt even more real to me, with actual women's clothes. Sometimes, a drive in the desert was the only place I felt safe wearing women's clothes, top to bottom and underneath. Because, unlike my friend Jake, I was not prepared to share my truth with anyone. If I would have expressed my true gender to the extent that Jake was able to, I would have been the school faggot. And I know that that's a really awful word to say, but that's what they would have called me. I wouldn't have survived that. Reconnecting with my friends in the last several years over social media has been great. I was really thankful by the amount of support and well wishes I received when I came out as a trans woman. I didn't expect it. It's kind of a conservative little town. I was so appreciative. Friends, another privilege for which I am grateful. It's something that I realize not everybody has. Thanks so much for listening. If you haven't already, please subscribe, like us on Facebook, and join the conversation. If you would like to support the podcast, visit us on Patreon and consider becoming a patron of the show. Until next time, I'm Christiana, and this is Trans Chat, brought to you by True Voice Lessons, LLC. Take care, be safe, be you, and be proud.